Hello again. This is the third and final episode in a series with Matt O'Kane. Today, we are going to dive into another story, talk about the forensic side of cybersecurity and the resiliency piece. So how did somebody get in? What did they do once they got in? But also, what do you do to recover and what do you do to prevent it from happening again? Hopefully I summarized that well enough.
That was great.
Feel free. Thank you very much. Thank you. Love that. All right, Matt, let's hit us with another story. You have the floor.
All right. Okay. So this was a case where there was a technology partner that we had that had good resilience plans with their customers. So what you want to do is you want to be able to work out resiliency is about how quickly can we bounce back.
Right.
So the power might not always operate. We might be under cyber attack. We might have the radio might be jammed, but we still have to keep a hospital open. We still have to keep a supermarket open. Mm-hmm. We still have to deliver our company's primary function. Mm-hmm. So resiliency is about how do we plan for that to maximize the chances of that ahead of time, because we can't control everything, right? And so there was a company that we dealt with that had a great resiliency plan. And what happened in this case, it was an overseas business. And they suffered a ransom strike. So there was a person who downloaded some software, and it turned out, and they thought it was good open source software, but it turned out to be malware under analysis. Okay. So this is my point, is that virus scanners are only 50% effective. So you want to be very selective on what software you run. Okay. So anyway, there was an unfortunate situation where this person was trying to do the right thing, got bad software, put it on their machine. Criminals realized that they had access now to a massive pool of about 200 terabytes of data of value. And so what they then tried to do was then they undertook to look at that data and to analyze it, and then they tried to extort the business with it, right? And so the business got a ransom note, and the ransom note said, we've encrypted all your data. We demand, and I think it was a few $100s, because this was a country. It's not like Australia. It was outside of Australia, and there was different pricing. Criminals priced their ransoms based on what they think the insurance companies are going to pay.
Yeah, like GDP indexed or something, like
right.
Per capita. Yeah, I mean, they're not assholes. They're going to be reasonable about it.
Unfortunately, they run like very well organized businesses, right? It is crazy. It is crazy. So anyway, they got this note, and then they contacted me, and they said, "Look, what can we do to address it?" And I said, "Well, what do you want to try and do?" And they didn't, because the information they didn't have a backup, right? They thought that it was one failing of their resilience plan, is that they said we didn't need to worry about backing up this information. But what was good about it after analysis was that they had an outstanding IT team that detected anomaly behavior. Mm-hmm. And so most of the modern cybersecurity standards, they have this feature we call assume breach, because the big unknown factor in any system is the human factor. And because it's always a human factor. It's not intentional. The best example I could give is, one of the things that you see is these phishing exercises. You ever had one of those phishing exercises? Yeah. Right. Now,
fail every time.
Every time. The best I've heard is for big companies, is about 3% failure rate. Right? Now, that's high.
Yeah. It's a lot of people in a company of 1,000 people then. 30 people who are just not doing so well.
Even if you're a cyber security expert and you get 1,000 of these messages, you can't tell me that a cybersecurity expert that gets like hundreds of emails a day, gets 1,000 of these things and can't get a perfect 100% score. That's inhuman, right?
Slight aside, but I've told the story before, but one time it was like a spoofing email that someone in my the accounts team in my last business received from me, and she dealt with it really well, just completely ignored it basically. I'm like, how'd you know it wasn't me? She said, I thought maybe it was going to be the domain it was sent from, something like that. No, I knew it wasn't you because it started off by asking me how my day was going. I was like, okay, I'll have a good look at myself. Anyway, it's a story I tell all the time. Never mind. All right, so
I like that story. That's good.
Where were we? Sorry.
So these guys detected the intruders, And within 3 hours, they booted them out. Very impressive, right?
Nice. Okay.
Like gold standard ability to detecting.
So that assumed breach leads to a very clear process.
They had a very clear process. Okay. They said that behavior is undesirable, and they locked the misbehaving workstations until it could be investigated, in which case I got called in.
Right. And at that point, you just give a golf clap all around. Well done, guys. It's like you're coming into a crime scene where it's all cordoned off and everything's under control.
Everything's under control. Okay. So we've got a bit of control, but there's obviously a bit of pressure because the customer's been told they've only got a few days to resolve this. Otherwise, their data cops it, right?
Okay.
So what they want to know is there still bad software in there? So we still have to contain it, right? And we still need to then look at the particular pool of data and see what we can recover. Now, a common fashion as I said, with criminals, they want the quick win. So instead of encrypting every file, they simply renamed every file like before. Puts a bit of pressure on the victim. So then we wrote software that went through, because these files were not like regular files. They were specialist files, right, in a specialist industry. So we couldn't get something off the shelf that would go through and determine if a file was a valid file or not a valid file. So I had to write specialist software that went through and tested each one of these files.
How long does that take?
To write software? About a week.
Okay.
Yeah, about a week. Yeah. So modern, the modern software creation's pretty good. We have a lot of help from AI and testing and we've done this before. Yeah. So just what I'm saying is like your IT team could eventually do it, but we do it all the time.
Yeah. Specialization, right? Sure.
Specialization, right? So, but then to search that much data, it actually took a month, right? There's a lot of data. Yeah. So once the system was up and running, there's bottlenecks in terms of bandwidth and disk speed and stuff and processing. And so it literally took a month to get through that. And we're able to sort it out. Yeah.
And you guys are searching all that data. You're looking for if it was happening. What's happening while that's happening? If it took about a month, is there
that's a good question.
Comms and all
that's
sorts
a good question. That's a good question. So in parallel to that, we're going through and making sure that they didn't do this thing called lateral movement. So lateral movement is once you get into a network, what the criminals try and do is they want to install like a persistent access, like what you'd have with an IT team. They want to have access to your machine to help you, or the criminals want to have access to your network and machines so they can get in whenever they want to get in. So we have to do a sweep of all of the machines on that network looking for things that are out of place. We've got specialist software for that. And remember that we're looking for not just known malware, but new malware. And we still run into new malware all the time. Right. So malware that's not yet registered with an anti-malware company, right? So we're trying to, so the procedure says we've got to get containment. So no one rests until we get containment. And then once we get containment, we can say to the customer, we've run every test. We're either 100% sure or we're reasonably sure. We can become much more confident if we know how they got in. So if we can find out how they got in, then we can usually trace through a lot of the actions they did. And if we can trace through a lot of the actions, we can narrow our search timeline, and it makes it a lot easier to find out to reach containment.
In your experience then, so when a malactor gets access to a network, is their initial approach find the thing of most value or get the most reach, or like what is, or is it just everything all at once?
It really depends. I noticed a really strange behavior a few years ago, which is that you'll have what we call you'll have sort of initial access, right? So someone will try and break in, and then nothing happens. And then so the exploitation of that access might happen a couple of days later, might happen a couple of weeks later. The longest I've seen is about 60 days. Right. But the longest I've seen documented is about 18 months. And so what's going on there? And the only theory that I can come up with is that, like any business, organized crime specializes. So one department or one organized crime group specializes in getting initial access. And once they got it, they either hand it off to another team that does exploitation. So there's not one person that gets in and does the whole attack chain. They specialize.
So interesting. Comes back to your point that these are businesses. These
They're
are
businesses.
the departments within enterprises. Yeah,
That's true. They've got one team, but I think you can reasonably draw the inference because of a delay. The one team gets in, and a few days later, one team then starts hunting around. So what you'll see is the first thing they want is as many passwords as they can get. Then they'll scan your network. So they'll look at what other devices can they see. Mm-hmm. So if they've got passwords and they've got a bit of a network map, they're off to the races, right? Yeah. And so that gets them. So what they're wanting to do is that usually the priority targets are going to be backups. So when you're planning your resiliency, you want to put backups so they're very difficult to access from your main network. Mm-hmm. So the backup goes, you're sending the backup out, but no one can reach it without intentional action. It's difficult, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is if they can destroy your backups, they've got a lot more control over you. So they go for backups first, right? And then they start looking around for, financial information. If it's a medical provider, they look around for patient information. They're looking for the most valuable. They're looking for the information they think they can get the most leverage off you in a untargeted data breach. Right? Most attacks in Australia are simply opportunistic, untargeted data breaches, right? When they're coming from crime gangs.
Okay. Yeah. And that was going to be my question there is, in your experience, have you had much experience dealing with presumed state actors as opposed to, these private gangs basically? Because I assume what they're after and their patience for a return is very different in those two scenarios.
Well, I work private. I don't do I train government people through University of New South Wales, Canberra, and I train government people. What I don't work for government.
But I'm thinking here more about like state actors as in the people who are committing the crime. So presumably, you've got your Russians, your Chinese, your North Koreans. I don't know, but I've worked a long time in telco, and there was a really scary presentation done once by a man who I sadly can't remember the name of now, but an American guy who did some work with the FBI, etc. And he was saying, look, there's a number of telcos where there'll be dormant exploits. And they're definitely state actors, and they go for the telcos because they know that they've got millions and millions and millions of endpoints accessible via the network. And his assumption was that, there's no immediate, desire to use those exploits. It's if and when it becomes necessary as part of a bigger conflict.
Look, any attack on any civilian business or individual is a criminal act in my mind. Even if it's perpetrated by a state actor, it's a war crime, right? In our world of I'm not an expert in state actor attacks. I am an expert in digital forensic incident response. I think that it's very rare for if a state actor is a knowledge. I want to be careful what I can say.
I love how I put you in the spot where you're like, I want to talk about private sector forensics. And like, no, you're talking about state actors coming in and sitting on their ass in a telco network for years.
Yeah. Look, okay, let me answer it this way. Until a couple of years ago, there was probably more of a tendency for people to say that a crime was perpetrated by a state actor. And sometimes I think the motivation behind that was to say, look, we were up against someone that we couldn't. What could we have possibly done?
Yeah.
Now the problem that you get with that is that I think we have to be careful making claims that are really strong like that without strong evidence, because it has implications, right?
What's North Korea going to do?
But I think that the other implication it might have is on your insurance, because if it's not a criminal act. If it's act of a state, well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it sounds like it could be an act of war, right? Is that going to affect your insurance policy, right? So I think the easiest solution is we're in the private sector. Let us focus on criminals and let governments focus on state actors, right? State actors arrive, and sometimes it's possible, I suppose, in a world where you could imagine some state actors targeting particular private enterprises. They already know who they are, right? If you are potential for that, you probably know that, and you've probably taken steps. But the majority of businesses suffer untargeted cybercrime. It may or may not be supported by the other government, but it's still whatever it looks like, it's a criminal act, and it should be prosecuted. We're seeing a lot more international cooperation for the prosecution of high-profile cyber criminal groups, and which I think is a very positive thing. We're seeing a lot more arrests.
Positive, yeah. Because global crime base, I guess. But okay, let's make rewind noises and let me take you right back to the scenario where we've got this malware was accidentally uploaded.
Yep, that's right.
It left this exploit well contained because of the assumed breach situation.
Yep.
You come in, you have about a month, you've run through what else has been impacted.
Yep.
My question is, how was the person who, what were the consequences for the person who uploaded the malware? And what was the interaction like with the management in that scenario? Like, how there's an entire month with unknowns in that period, right?
That's true.
So what is it like continuing to operate in an environment in those moments? So two clear questions there.
Okay, so let's deal with it in parts.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, in a situation like this, you're available. People call me at all times of the night and morning. You're available. You're trying to give reassurance that you're available, right? The second thing is you're trying to give them a lot of information. This might be the first time they've been through a major incident, and you want to just sort of say, look, this is how it normally goes.
Yeah.
And tell them this is, is this expected? Is this not expected? Sort of give them some sort of knowledge and roadmap about where they're at, right? So the main game is to reach containment quickly. Once you've got containment, you can eradicate the bad actor. That doesn't always happen cleanly because, as I said, if you can't work out how they got in, it's hard to get all the way to containment, but you've got to do the best you can, right? So once you get to containment, eradication, then it's all about finding out what was taken. What was done, what was taken, what was modified.
But while they're waiting for you to tell them that, I mean, how is the board being communicated with? How are the customers being communicated with? And how's the if we take this example specifically, the intra-management cooperation? Because I don't know if there'd be, I'd hate to be the CTO or the CIO in this situation. I'm really interested to sort of understand the dynamics in that intervening period.
Look, every company reacts to these things differently. And it's driven by culture, right? So you could have, I've seen cases where there's been a mistake by a single individual that's brought a company, and not an IT person, like a regular person, and has brought the company right to a terrible place. And the company have basically sat down and said, look, our culture is to be supportive of people who make genuine mistakes. And I support that. If a company ends up, and sometimes, unfortunately, the natural reaction of a cyber attack, or natural outcome sometimes, is end of life for the company, right? And so in those situations, there is an increased chance of people, they've obviously had something that's been destroyed, and they're looking for people to blame, right? And you can understand that emotional reaction, right? And all you could do is you could just be as supportive as you can. I think that, as I said, the conversation I had quite constantly is a starting position for any analysis is that you're a victim, right? Now, in any human endeavor, can we have done more to prevent something? Yes. But we're all not reading about, studying, implementing, investigating cyber breaches every day. We need to be realistic about what we can expect from people. And I think that, I talk about 3 C's about prevention, right? So one of the things I want to talk about is you've got individual cybersecurity looks different to organizational cyber.
Right.
Individual, you can control everything, right? There's only 3 rules that I have, right? Use only trusted devices. Do everything you can to keep a trust in your devices and protect your most important accounts. You can do that. Corporate and business cyber is different. It's got the 3 C's, my 3 C's. It's about culture. So how can we drive a culture of data safety so we don't upload our database to unknown partners? Or if we need to share data, we've removed personally identifiable information as much as we can. So that data is as safe as it can possibly be, right? So culture, complexity. How do we drive down the complexity of our systems? The more complex they are, the more things to maintain. And good cybersecurity is about being organized. So we want to be organized. So drive the complexity down, right? And compliance. We should move ourselves toward an appropriate cybersecurity standard over time.
Nice.
And if we could do that, and that's actually hard. Even though it sounds really simple, it's only 3 things. You know, everyone knows who runs a business. It's hard to get people moving in the same direction.
True. So culture, complexity, compliance.
That's right.
My question then, and maybe a good one to finish up on is, you've had a whole, like, I'd say half a career's worth of scenarios like this so far.
Yep.
How easy is it to get an exec group aligned behind those 3 C's post-event? And how long does that enthusiasm, if it does in fact exist, remain for before the she'll be right attitude creeps back in? Or is it actually you're finding that there's a fundamental shift now and people are just realizing that the 3 C's matter?
I think people want to do what they can. I think the challenge is to sort through the noise and find the best advice. That's what executive
your
leaders.
advice? Is that the best
My advice is the best advice.
Okay, good.
Your advice is the best advice. I think that's the big challenge that leadership teams face, is they get bombarded. The media is partly to blame too. Media runs stories about things that are not risks, right? So there was a whole moral panic about juice jacking, which is this idea where you plug in an iPhone to an unknown charger and suddenly the iPhone's been compromised. There is not a single documented case of juice jacking in the world.
First time I'm hearing of it, so I'm glad I haven't worried about it at this point. That's good.
Yeah, so the media sort of runs. So we you know, the cyber comes down to just be organised, like any other security enterprise. Who's supposed to be there? What are we trying to protect? How do we organise things so they're all inside the fence and not all over the place, right? How do we set up our most common protective controls? It's just being about organised.
Yeah.
Right? Technology, sure, is important, but a lot of it is this human engagement, taking our organisations on the journey, you know, thinking about things and trying to get advice about what's real and what's not.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Let's see. Those are 3 great examples and a lot of really good takeaways. And it's just scary how I think everybody who is in business, every single day, there is someone somewhere having the worst day of work of their life as they go through this kind of stuff. So it's just everywhere and all the time. And it's great to understand what we can be doing now to mitigate the chance of us actually having a similar day. And if we do, what is the best way to immediately start dealing with that to limit the risks? Or
don't wait for the day. If you need to, call me, but plan ahead, call before that.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Don't worry.
All right, Matt. And also, if people want to find you, I'm guessing LinkedIn.
Yep.
You do a pretty good job of staying active on there, so that's cool.
Yep.
Okay. If you have any questions, hit them up on LinkedIn. That'd be great. I hope those 3 episodes, of course, if you haven't seen the other 2, please go back and watch 1 and 2. But I hope you've enjoyed this and the others if you've watched them. We'll see you again soon.